In most programs, I've commented on the positive impacts of the tourism industry, such as income generation, employment, and economic development. However, there are always two sides to every coin. In this sense, tourism growth generates negative impacts, not only in the environment, but also in the culture. The built face of modern mass tourism is very homogenized. How does one safeguard local culture in an international market? How does one protect cultural diversity in a context in which customer demand tends to prevail over the needs of the local population? And how do the authorities ensure that the population's needs will be met as effectively as the tourists? Today, on The Travel Insider, we'll discuss the possible and largely unseen negative effects that cultural tourism has on the traditional identity of its people. In Mexico, the link between tourism and traditional manifestations began in the 60s and 70s. The exploitation of this idea, however, increased in the presidency of Vicente Fox when the Pueblos Mágicos program was created to compete with the sun and beach destinations in an attempt to bring some of the economic prosperity of tourism to other towns. What they didn't bear in mind was that in some cases, tourism causes the subordination of culture and society to tourism objectives and entails a confrontation between the value system and needs of residents and tourists. Camila Chapela Ayala, an academic of the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México, mentions that the provision of public goods and services and the maintenance of urban spaces through the Pueblos Mágicos program are policies that should benefit the quality of life of the villagers as a public resource, but the results are not so. Many of the Pueblos Mágicos were hastily nominated in the run-in to elections or at the end of presidential terms, and they simply were not up to standard and have become unsustainable. The mercantilist vision of the project has generated a greater segregation of the local inhabitant and a loss of identity, very much in the same way that happens with shopping centres when they're developed in underprivileged areas. This could be defined as erosion of the local culture. It's also observed when the excessive amount of tourists in the receiving localities cause traditional craftsmen to produce products by quantity and not by quality, in order to satisfy mass tourism, which degrades the artistic and symbolic values of locally produced art. Within the negative socio-cultural impacts, it's said that tourism doesn't contribute to the exchange of ideas and understanding between the tourist and the local people. This is presented to a greater extent when tourists and residents don't speak the same language. An example of this would be Maya culture and international visitors in the southeast of Mexico. Granted, there are World Heritage sites of great cultural importance, but the real lives of indigenous Maya people are not fully understood by visitors, and instead, the Mayan culture is played out more through theme parks than in real Mayan villages. There's also the case of violation of cultural heritage rights. It's produced by treating the local culture as a commodity for sale and trading with it. It happens, for example, when some traditional events and parties are put on sale on demand for tourists, resulting in experiences distorted from reality. But not only traditional celebrations and art forms are victims of this, places can also suffer from these transformations through marketing. One of the fundamental examples is the cenotes, bodies of water that were originally the only sources of water for the Mayan civilization, who in their cosmology considered them sacred places, doors to the underworld. Through tourism, these places have become commodities. That is, they become spaces that are offered for tourists to consume, and that's a transcendental change, both in the use and in the valuation and significance of these spaces. The cenotes now function as spaces of recreation, fun, exploration, adventures, and high-risk activities. In the same way as the Western world respects the sanctity and privacy of the church as a place of worship, a cenote's original purpose was intended for deeply religious practices. So to me, snorkeling or scuba diving there is disrespectful. It's like walking on someone's grave. Sometimes governments in developing countries take an overly optimistic view of tourism. They undertake aggressive investment programs to promote tourism, giving them the highest priority in their development plans. The problem is that there hasn't been a deep discussion of the implications that tourism has on these traditions and culture, and there are no mechanisms to defend these manifestations as public policy. So now it will be up to each of us to help the preservation of knowledge, ideas, traditions and customs that characterize a people. Don't forget to follow us on all our social media and leave a comment to let us know what you think.